Arcology. It is one of those words that gets thrown around in space settlement circles as if everybody knows exactly what it means. But the original concept had nothing to do with space, and once you look at what it actually requires, the definition starts pulling in two opposite directions depending on whether you're on the Earth or off it. That tension turns out to matter. So, arcology, what is it and what should we use it for?
And how it would relate to space settlement.
Yes, space arcologies is what we're talking about now.
Right.
Indeed.
Right. So, well, arcology is a combined word for architecture and ecology.
Yep.
So, as I understand it, the concept is high density living that is a pleasant place to live, but also doesn't impact the outside environment. So you could build an arcology in the middle of a forest, and the arcology is self-sustaining, and the forest outside is left alone and not impacted by all of the humans and their activities inside the arcology, as opposed to, say, a city surrounded by forest usually messes up the forest pretty bad. So as
Yes.
I understand it, that's kind of the thought behind the original arcology. It had nothing to do with space. It had everything to do with minimizing human impact on the natural world outside.
Yeah, so it's kind of a different take on the self-sufficiency
Hmm.
concept and self-growing that we have been talking about earlier.
Right.
But it's from yet another angle. It's more from the outside. You shouldn't spoil the nature. You should make
Mhm.
sure that you grow whatever you need to grow inside your settlement or town or building. Quite often, it's just one building is often depicted as this is the arcology. It's a building, or it's a spaceship for that matter, space arcs.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen images where, like they'll take like in theory, you could take like a skyscraper, right, and turn that into an arcology where
Mm.
it becomes self-sufficient and it's got growing on terraces and the roof and stuff, captures its own water, and really doesn't need much in the way of input from an outside source. Or I've seen arcologies where they're just massive cities that look almost like a single building,
Yeah,
and everything is housed inside and all the activity is inside.
yeah, it's a compact unit, lots of people, or
Mhm.
lots dense amount
Very
of
dense.
people. It doesn't have to be a large quantity of people, but it needs to be enough to keep that thing running anyway. So
Right.
you at least need to grow your food or most of your food, and quite commonly they are also aiming at producing all the energy needed,
Yep.
which may be difficult on a skyscraper. If, even covering it with photovoltaics and a couple of wind turbines at the top, it's probably difficult to get it self-sufficient on energy.
Yeah, I don't know how you would actually make any of this work, but that's kind of the thought process at least. But yeah, I think it's easier to see how a space settlement is an arcology, right? It doesn't impact its external environment because, it's hostile. So there's not much you can do to it, but you need to be self-contained anyway. So arcologies in space work at about the same level. They're self-contained, high density, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something I hear people bringing up. We shouldn't colonize the moon because then we will just ruin it like we have ruined Earth, which I think is a bit odd. So it's full of essentially asbestos dust, extremely dangerous to inhale, poisonous, abrasive, and everything. How can we ruin that? We make
Well,
bricks out of it and put them in stacks. That's more ugly than the original pristine dust, I guess.
I guess it really depends on where you're coming from, right? If you're
Mm.
worried about, oh, we'll mess up the ecosystem, obviously there's no ecosystem on the moon, so who cares, right?
Anyways,
Figure that out when it becomes a problem. But Right now, I'd like to just get any kind of activity going. That'd be terrific.
Any kind of activity. Yes, indeed, I agree. So let's drop that line of thought. We're not going to
Right.
ruin the moon. We're going to put arcologies on it.
Right. So arcologies, I think, for space purposes, for space settlement purposes, aren't about the original thought of protecting the environment from human activity. They're more along the lines of protecting the humans and their environment from the outside environment.
Yes, and not just from the outside environment, but also essentially from humans overdoing the thing and using up all resources so that the rest of the arcology don't have anything left.
Yes,
You need,
resource wars could be a thing on the moon,
yes,
right? I mean, there's a lot of a handful of things, oxygen, iron, aluminum, and there is very little of a whole bunch of other stuff. So, and most
yes.
of it's concentrated in certain areas. So, yeah.
It is indeed. So yeah, but it is a lot about not rationing is the wrong word, but being careful with how much you use of what is rare. And then I guess you don't need to be as careful about things that you automatically get a large throughput of. Like on the moon, that would probably be oxygen. Oxygen is cheap.
Yeah.
Nitrogen is expensive. Carbon is expensive.
Yeah, most extraction processes are going to have a lot of oxygen, right? I
Yeah.
mean, 'cause everything's bound up as oxide. So, yeah, that's not something I think settlers have to worry about. But circling back to the arcology thing, I think the things that are relevant are, you know, energy production, food production, waste management. All that stuff is the same basically for an arcology in the desert or in the Arctic or on the moon or Mars or whatever. They've all got to do those things.
Yeah.
Something specific for space settlements that don't necessarily happen with terrestrial settlement arcologies would be, you know, keeping a pressurized, livable space, um, and maybe specific things like, heat management. Maybe not a big
The
deal on
moon is
terrestrial stuff.
colder. The moon is colder than any place on Earth. Yes.
Or hotter, depending on what time of the
No.
day.
No, well, yeah, where you are on the day at the equator, yes, but
Yeah. So,
otherwise, at an average, it's colder, and that's probably the worst problem that it's at an average colder.
well, I was thinking more along the lines of your arcology in a space settlement has to deal with thermal management from a
Yes.
rejection standpoint, right? Like human activities generate a lot of heat. If it's inside a pressurized vessel, it probably has to have an active way to moderate that heat, remove it or bring some in or whatever. Not necessarily something if your arcology is in the desert in Arizona, right? You just have to kind of moderate the incoming heat a little bit. So
No,
thermal management just is a different scale probably for space settlements.
yes, but I do think the scale is that it's colder. The equator is at an average minus 60 degrees. There are, or at least there is, human settlements, possibly only one in Russia, that actually has that kind of average temperature. But it is really, really cold. And the only place to live on the moon is underground. So there you are in contact with rock or possibly the finer regolith, but you can at least choose to be in contact with rock, and that means you have cooling. That's not a problem.
Well, we agree that being underground is the only way to build a lunar settlement or a Martian settlement, but there are others who don't, and they believe being on the surface is better. So those
Uh,
settlements would have a harder, more difficult thermal environment to deal with.
Actually, no, still, because they would need a couple of meters, probably like 10 of regolith in order to get radiation down to sustainable levels. and that is more than enough for protecting against the heat.
But now it's effectively underground. I mean, if you build
Yes,
something on the surface and then
yes,
bury it, it's effectively underground again. I'm talking
yes.
about all the designs and drawings and pictures you see of domes and all kinds of shapes of stuff
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
surface.
but that's not realistic. They
Well, but
can't do.
that's realistic to the vast majority of people when they think about lunar settlement. They think about domes and cool shapes on the surface and Space 1999 Moonbase Alpha all on the surface and stuff. That's what they think
Yes,
about.
yes.
You
But that
say
was a
it's
while ago.
what?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right. It is a common misconception, but it's still a misconception. It's not the problem we will have.
But it's not a misconception in most people's minds. And I'm not talking just laymen. I mean, I've been to conferences where and I've seen the results of conferences where people are like, "Hey, we're building a city on Mars. Here's what a million person city on Mars looks like." And it is all on the surface. Well, most of it is.
Yeah.
And these are reputable people coming up with these plans. And it's not just people that don't know better, it's people that know better and they're still pushing, 3D printing of lunar habitats on the surface. So,
Yeah.
I mean, if we want to push arcologies that are underground, we're in the minority.
Yeah, 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 yeah. But still, I think that's where they're going. So I don't mind being a minority. I mind being wrong.
Well, I don't know who's wrong, because nobody's built anything on the lunar surface, let alone Mars. So I say try everything, right?
I wouldn't want anybody to try being in the radiation environment that you have on any surface. I'm
Well,
not sure about Mars because it does have an atmosphere, although tenuous, that might absorb some radiation, but it is the cosmic radiation, so it's not the solar flares that are the problem. They can be handled.
the difference is that a traditional arcology protects the environment from people, a space arcology protects the people from the environment.
That's a good distinction. I like that.
Thanks.
And what is common between an arcology anywhere is that it is to some degree self-sufficient. It's kind of part of the ethos of an arcology is that it is self-sufficient and self-contained within a building or a small set of buildings.
Yeah, and usually it's isolated from its environment, right? In the first instance, it's trying to isolate its activity from the environment. In a space one, it's isolated from the environment because the environment's trying to kill everybody. So,
Yeah.
but they're both effectively deliberately isolated from their environment.
Yeah, yeah, yes, which means that it is necessary for space settlements to be an arcology in that definition, isolated from the environment and essentially self-sufficient.
Yeah, yeah. I think well built space settlements would definitely be considered arcologies.
Yeah. And a space settlement that is not well built, I would consider that to be dead whenever Earth decides to not send supply ships.
Well, that's pretty much it, right? One that isn't designed to be self-sufficient from the go is probably going to have a rough time when their logistics get hung up somewhere for whatever
Yeah,
reason. Earth
yeah,
deciding not to send stuff, or your scheduled rocket blows up and then they can't get another one to you for another couple weeks. You know, whatever. If you're not designed to last through those problems, then yeah, you're gonna have trouble.
yeah. And you will be have very difficult times trying to negotiate. It's much easier to say, okay, you don't want to sell us that. Fine, we don't buy it.
Yes, you're right. A more self-sufficient settlement will definitely have more negotiating power than one that desperately needs a resupply continually. Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, that stops really being a settlement at that point, and it's, an outpost or a base or whatever. It's not
Yeah,
really
and
meant to be self-sufficient. And if things go sideways, there should be a plan to get everybody out of there quickly.
yeah,
And that's kind of I think I see that as a kind of a defining thing between a base and an outpost versus a settlement. You know, one, you should be able to evacuate if something goes wrong. The other, your first plan shouldn't be to evacuate. Your first plan should be to have built-in redundancy, so if something goes
yeah,
wrong, you can just switch over and not have to leave.
yeah. Sort of problems, whatever they are, but using alternative methods,
Yeah.
which
Or
you have prepared or and probably up and running somewhere. But it's not just you have them stored away somewhere. It's you have several ways of doing things, and if one and there is capacity enough to handle the entire settlement using any one of them.
sure, and bake that right into the design,
Yeah,
that you can switch over to different types of whatever you need or different procedures or whatever, as opposed to, like a base or settlement where it's built into the design that you will get resupply and you will use the highest tech equipment that Earth can send you because that's what's most efficient.
yeah,
So yeah, settlement is fundamentally different, starting just from the designs than a base. And I think a lot of people are like, well, we'll build a base and then we'll turn it into a settlement. And it's like, that's going to be really hard and probably expensive because they have totally different design philosophies.
yes. The philosophy becomes really different there. So I think it's critically important to start by designing for a self-sufficient base, and then work backwards to find out what do you need to send first
Yeah,
in
no, I
order to
agree.
make it as fast as possible.
I agree. I think that that is a much better way to build a settlement is to say, this is what we want at the end, and let's figure out how we can start with a limited base, but we have a pathway to getting to where we have a self-sufficient settlement, as opposed to, well, let's just build a base, and then we'll try to figure out further down the line how we're going to make it an actual settlement. Much more
Yeah,
difficult the second way.
yeah, and it kind of puts the responsibility in the wrong place, because the settlers of a early lunar base, they will be pretty few, and they will be busy doing whatever it needs doing in order to survive there, because it isn't like Earth. They have to do a lot of things differently, and it doesn't matter how much preparation we have done. It will still be a lot of things that will appear that are really different. So
Yep.
we need to do the homework and essentially build space arcologies on Earth before we build them on the moon.
That's one way to go about doing it. And I think this tie into what we were just saying. An arcology is greater than the sum of its parts, right?
Yeah,
So it's planned out that all the pieces will fit and work together. So you start with your final design and you figure out how to build that out, as opposed to we were saying, you don't just say, well, we're going to build a little town and we're going to turn this town, which is totally not an arcology, but we'll figure out how to make it into an arcology in the future. That's a difficult way to do it.
yeah,
So, yeah, another reason why space settlements are like arcologies. They need to be planned as a whole unit, what your end result is, and then you reverse engineer how you're going to get there.
yeah. And that, of course, you can do on Earth as well. So
I know you want to talk about building analogs on Earth, and I think that that's
yeah,
great. I think that that's great with a caveat, a little asterisk by that.
yeah, yeah.
I don't think that that should slow us down. I think we should
No,
do it
no.
simultaneously, right?
Yes, that's part of my point actually. There are, what are we, 10 billion people, 8 billion. Uh,
Somewhere between those two, I think.
so we can spare a couple of small towns, say a million or so, spread out in 100 different places with 10,000 in each and build arcologies there. That wouldn't be noticeable in the grand scheme of things, actually.
Probably not, but that's assuming that you get general buy-in from whatever population you're going to do
Yeah,
this
yeah,
with.
yeah.
I
No,
liked
that's
the idea. Way back in the day, there was a book called The Millennial Foundation, and
mm,
I think they're still around
that's
in
good.
some capacity called like the Living Universe Foundation or whatever. But the thought was, we'll start by building big ocean arcologies,
Yeah,
and we'll use what we learn from that and the money we generate from that to then build lunar arcologies and orbital arcologies and then move out into the rest of the solar system. But it's a stepping stone. You learn from one thing and use the money you generate there to go to the next stage.
yeah.
So I don't know about building on land because land is owned by some government somewhere. And I like the idea of the ocean arcologies that are out in the open ocean in a nice calm area somewhere on the equator in like the Indian Ocean or something like that.
That might be a good way to end, actually. Do we have a conclusion?
Um, Space settlements are arcologies, but arcologies aren't necessarily space settlements.
And what you said earlier, that on Earth, an arcology is intended to protect the environment against people, and in space, the arcology is intended to protect people against the environment.
Yep, I think that that's a pretty good definition.